If you're calling it medicine, then it should be guided by medical ethics. If you're calling it extreme cosmetic body modification that is not medicine and is not meant to improve your health or alleviate any sort of medical
then maybe
problem.
we can compromise. Maybe that's our common ground.
Right.
We don't call it medicine, and we just allow people to set up clinics to just, once you're 18, just lop off people's genitals. Who is somebody to tell anybody that they shouldn't have their limbs chopped off? Like, who are you to tell someone they shouldn't have their limbs chopped off?
I am.
I know that must seem totally insane. Everyone's looking at me like I'm completely insane, but I'm like, I'm being really sincere. Like, who am I to tell anybody you can live any kind of life you want to lead? So your problem is calling this medicine and having physicians do this.
Absolutely.
But you don't have any problem with someone who's 18 just lopping off their own junk.
I think it would be ill-advised.
I think that should give us courage, exposure to other people's perspectives.
It's moving us in a good direction. So Mia, we just talked about trans issues. Let's do a deeper dive. Talk to me about the creation of the trans child or a trans period.
Okay. I love the history of the transgender child because it's quite mad when you think about it, that all of a sudden in the 2000s, first decade of this century, a new type of human being sprang into existence and everyone went along with it. And it's a crazy idea, this idea that children can be born in the wrong body. That's a really mad idea, and yet we all went along with it. But the history goes back further, and it's quite a dark history. So we talked last time about there are the waves of this medical experiment. In wave 2 in the 1950s, this was triggered by a man went by Christine Jurgensen. He was a veteran. He went to Denmark. He came back. He was this blonde bombshell, and he's on the cover of newspapers and everything, and it's a big sensational story. And it triggered an epidemic, a wave of men showing up at psychiatrist clinics and the clinics of sexologists seeking the same treatment, seeking the hormones and surgeries. And these men all told the same story. They all said that they were really feminine children. When they were young, they were really feminine, and they always knew that they were female on the inside. The sexologists and the psychiatrists, at first they didn't really notice, but after a while they started to notice that all of the stories were the same. And they started to suspect that the men were fabricating these stories as a way to get on hormones and surgeries. They were just telling the psychiatrists what they wanted to hear. But because they didn't notice that at first, they decided to turn their attention to a search for transsexual children. So all of these men are saying they're feminine boys, so they think, well, we'll go and look for the transsexual children, the feminine boys. So they did. This became, like, they I'm sure have always been feminine boys, but they didn't have a psychiatric disorder. They weren't of interest in the medical field. They were just left alone to be feminine boys. But they become a research of interest to researchers. They did that because they wanted to find the transsexual children, and they hoped that they could intervene and prevent them from growing up to be transsexual adults. That was the idea. So they find all of these feminine boys and they start studying them. And they did a prospective study. So they find the feminine boys and they follow them for 20 years to see whether they grow up to be transsexual. What they actually found was that they did not find transsexual children. They found pre-homosexual children. They found boys who were destined to grow up to be gay. But because it was a 20-year study and they started it in the 1960s, they didn't get the result until the 1980s. So in the meantime, the concept of the transgender child springs into existence. They've because the men were telling this story and then they're looking at the children, and this becomes a research interest. The idea that you can have a transsexual child is out there. It exists. So they get the diagnosis into the DSM. Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, in 1980, there's a diagnosis, gender identity disorder of childhood. That's what it is. But at this stage, while the idea is out there, no one is transing children. No one is telling these little effeminate boys that they are girls. And the reason for that is we don't yet have puberty blockers. You can't...
Interesting. Okay.
Right. Like puberty blockers is what created the transgender child as we know it, because you couldn't tell a little boy that he's a girl, raise him as a girl, and then he hits puberty, and male puberty hits and he realizes he's definitely not a girl, right? So all of these boys, they're not strictly transgender children yet. They're just children with a psychiatric disorder, gender identity disorder. Then the 20-year study comes out. They followed 44 boys who were very effeminate. They followed them all the way up to adulthood. Most of them are gay. Only one of them identifies as transgender. So if this field of medicine were guided by evidence and science, at that point they would have abandoned the search for transgender children. They would have abandoned the entire concept, because all they found were pre-homosexuals.
Or they would have replicated the study again with a different N, maybe a larger N.
Actually, well, okay, they did. I'm talking about the most famous one, which is Richard Green's. It's got a weird title, the Sissy Boy Study. That's actually what it's called. But no, they did. And there's no replication crisis here. Every single study that they did at the time, not quite so long, 20 years.
You knew where I was going with the replication crisis. Yeah, okay.
Right, but there's not. In this part of the study, there's no replication crisis. They all showed that most of them would grow up to be gay. This is how we know that extreme gender nonconformity in childhood is a strong indicator of homosexuality in adulthood, largely because they were looking for transgender children and all they found were future homosexuals. So there were multiple studies and they all show the same thing. These kids are not growing up to be trans, they're growing up to be gay.
That must have disappointed them because they didn't have enough children to mutilate.
They're not mutilating children at this point. When they originally started it, they were actually trying to prevent transsexual adults. At this time in the 50s, 60s, 70s, being transsexual is not desirable. They don't think that this is a positive outcome yet, because we don't yet have the trans rights movement that tells us trans is beautiful, stunning and brave and something to celebrate. So they thought if they intervened early enough, they could stop these boys being so effeminate, and then they would just grow up to be they wouldn't grow up to want body parts chopped off. Somewhere along the way, it gets all muddled. So that's the first wave, and they do not find transsexual children. But like I said, the idea, first of all, gender nonconformity in childhood has been pathologized. It's now in the DSM. It's a diagnosis. You can have gender identity disorder of childhood. That made it into the DSM in 1980. So we've already got that pathologized. But again, without puberty blockers, you can't transition these kids.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah. So puberty blockers are really the linchpin.
Puberty blockers, exactly. So the timing is spot on as well. So puberty blockers, they first come up with it in the 1990s. There's almost no literature. There's just they've got one girl that they've done it to so far. And they consider that one case study to be a success, even though the results were ethically dubious for sure. She was a gender nonconforming lesbian. Her family couldn't accept her sexuality or her gender nonconformity.
Interesting.
So they gave her puberty blockers, testosterone, chopped her breasts off, and did the genital surgery. And then they follow her up, and she says she's happy, and this is a recurrent theme in all of this research. She says she's happy. She says she doesn't feel gender dysphoria, but she's depressed, she has no long-term relationship, and she feels shame about her genital appearance, which sounds exactly like gender dysphoria to me. It doesn't sound like a cure, but this is the one case, and then we're off.
You know, it also reminds me when we did the event the other day, when I asked people if they ever thought they were trans, the one woman who came from a staunchly Christian Hispanic family thought that she could have been because she was ashamed and she didn't want to make her parents ashamed. So there are other factors at play.
The theme, they call it internalized homophobia. That's the modern terminology for it. I don't know what it would have been before. It's all the way through the history of this experiment. Like Christine Jorgensen, that man that I was just talking about, who triggered this experiment as we know it. He was an effeminate boy growing up in a religious family, discovers that he's homosexual at adolescence, and he was a self-loathing gay man, and he sought medical treatment to become a woman because he didn't want to be a gay man. There's a lot of internalized homophobia. It's homosexuals living in a homophobic world who do not want to be gay, and this medical treatment offers them a way out of that. So this girl, the first patient zero in the puberty suppression experiment, she was lesbian, and she just didn't want to be a lesbian. She thought she would be more comfortable being a man.
It's so heartbreaking.
It's so homophobic.
So heartbreaking.
All the way through. It's just, it's.
Yeah, Andrew Doyle has made that point repeatedly, that the trans movement is homophobic. And that's why it's always weird to me to see the kind of the co-option of the trans flag. But let's reverse the conversation a bit, please. Could you talk about puberty blockers? Because I'd like to go in a little more depth on that, please.
Yes. Right. So we like this patient, she's the first one. Just of note, like based on just her, one case study, WPATH, who we talked about in the last conversation, WPATH include puberty blockers in their standards of care 6 in 2001. Based on an N of 1. They've got a case study, that's it.
That's crazy.
Totally insane.
You don't do that for anything else, just by the way.
Can you imagine? Anyway, they put it in. So they get a whole group, I think there's about 70 of them in the 2000s. The Dutch are doing this. And again, of the 70, honestly, I think maybe like 68 were homosexual. Or 69, almost all of them were homosexual adolescents who are the first participants in the puberty suppression experiment. Desistance rates in the past, before blocking puberty, again, we talked about this, most of them would have reconciled with their body had they had the opportunity to go through puberty in the past, but all of them progressed to cross-sex hormones in the first experiment. And for some reason, it rings no alarm bells. Everybody just thinks... They think they've discovered the way to find like the ones who would persist. They think they found the magic formula. They don't realize that something about puberty blockers is interfering with the natural desistance. But anyway, endocrinology is like that. I find it's a field that they get swept up in the excitement of discovery, like since the very beginning. I think because they feel themselves to be playing God. They're like miracle workers. When the field first started, they would bring diabetics back from the dead. You know, somebody's in a diabetic coma, they're about to die, and they get insulin and bring them back from the dead. Like they feel like they're miracle makers. So they're swept up in the excitement of it. And the Dutch decide to do what they consider to be the study, what's the word for it? I can't remember. It's not a randomized control trial because everyone gets the drugs, but a controlled study. And again, they take a whole group of kids. There's 70 of them. They give them puberty blockers. And then they follow them, they give them cross-sex hormones, and then they give them surgeries. And there's 2 foundational studies published in 2011 and 2014. This is the basis of the entire experiment. Just these 2 studies, the entire puberty suppression experiment is based upon these 2.
That's so crazy to me.
It's crazy, but wait till you hear about the actual study, because
Okay, go ahead.
Let me see if I have to do it justice. So there's selection bias, first of all. Very extreme selection bias in that there were 111 initially, and they took the first 70. And the reason they took the first 70, or they took the 70 that progressed onto cross-sex hormones, which is basically they filtered out all the ones who did not succeed on or they either didn't take puberty blockers, or puberty blockers were there was a bad outcome.
They started with their conclusion and jerry-rigged the data, but keep going.
Okay. And then we progress to the hormones. There should be 3 studies, but we've never seen the one for cross-sex hormones. They just didn't publish it. That makes me very suspicious, because normally if something has positive results, they'll publish. We've never seen it. It's just disappeared. There's no explanation for why we don't have it. Then we get onto the surgery part of it, and we're down to 55 young people. Bear in mind, they were all physically healthy when they started. And they basically killed one of them. So this kid, he's a boy, identifying as a girl, had his puberty blocked, so he didn't develop. And when they do the vaginoplasty, when they invert the penis, they use the penile tissue to line the vagina, the new vagina that they're making. But because he didn't develop, they didn't have enough tissue. That's a big problem with puberty blockers, and they saw that from the start as well. It makes creating this neo-vagina much more difficult. So they had to use a section of the kid's colon, and he died of necrotizing fasciitis, which is it's a really terrible way to die as well. I'm sure he died in agony. And basically that happened because they blocked his puberty. They had to do the more complicated surgery precisely because they blocked his puberty. So we're talking an almost 2% fatality rate with healthy, previously, formerly healthy adolescents. Now, I think in any other branch of medicine, if you kill almost 2% of your healthy patients, that's it, the experiment's over. But of course it's not, we know that. And then they did another remarkable thing, and it's really difficult for me to explain. Let me see if I can do it. So before they start the experiment, they give these kids a questionnaire to measure how severe their gender dysphoria was. And so the girls will get something like, when someone treats me as a girl, I feel dysphoric, or I feel sad, or I feel bad. And it's like a scale of 1 to 5, so 5 being very gender dysphoric. So she thinks she's a boy, she's going to score high, 5. But then she goes through the whole experiment, she gets to the other end, and they flip the survey, so they give her the boy one. So the survey says, when someone treats me like a boy, I feel bad. She's going to score really low because she thinks she's a boy and she likes being treated as a boy. But it makes no sense. So you see, the best analogy to explain how stupid it is from Dr. Julia Mason, who is a wonderful pediatrician who's been talking about this for years. She says, technically, you could just give these kids a lollipop. You could give them the gender dysphoria scale, they fill it in, you give them a lollipop, then you switch it and they fill it in, and their gender dysphoria is resolved. So lollipops cure gender dysphoria. Like, there's no sense to it. It's a totally mad... That should have invalidated the results. Killing one of the kids should have invalidated the results. The selection bias should have invalidated the results. Instead, these 2 studies are the foundation of the entire puberty suppression experiment. And there's a wonderful concept. It's called Runaway diffusion. I got this there's an article, The Myth of Reliable Research. If anyone really wants to understand this experiment, The Myth of Reliable Research is the best article to read. And so the puberty suppression experiment, these 2 terrible studies, are what's called an innovative experiment. There's no control trial, there's no control group, it's just they had an idea and they tried it out. What's supposed to happen after you have this experiment is you're then supposed to progress to the rigorous clinical trials to make sure that your results can be replicated. They skipped it. That never happened. What happened instead is something called runaway diffusion. The medical world they mistook these two experiments as being proven clinical practice, and the experiment escaped the lab and entered mainstream medicine at the exact moment, and this is really what makes it so terrible, it escaped into mainstream medicine at the exact moment that the social contagion of adolescents identifying as transgender began in 2015. 2014, 2015, this is exactly when the social contagion began, and it's exactly when this insane experiment escaped the lab and entered mainstream practice.
And no one in the professional medical organizations, were they just not asking questions?
You see, this runaway diffusion...
That's the thing I don't get. Yeah.
Runaway diffusion does happen. Like, that term is a term used in medicine. So the medical world does do this sometimes. They do accidentally think that something is proven medical practice and it's out. With puberty suppression, I mean, of course, there's transactivism injected into it.
Okay, but even the diffusion, and I can't think of another example. I was thinking maybe ulcers being caused by stress, but that doesn't quite do it. But even then, you would look at the data. You'd examine the studies. And nobody did that?
Nobody did it. And honestly, if you look at the guidelines, obviously WPATH standards of care, they cite any guideline that is saying this is the way to treat trans-identified children. The only citations they would have would be these two Dutch studies. Like, that, those are the only two. So it's not as if...
And nobody, literally nobody said, maybe I should read those studies. Maybe I should take a look at those.
Yeah, it's not as if they had to read through 100 different citations. There were two.
Yeah.
There were only two citations.
So explain to me how that isn't negligence at the highest levels.
No, it is. Of course it is.
So they need to be sued into oblivion.
Absolutely, they do. And the good thing is the AAP is, the American Academy of Pediatrics is named in a lawsuit. I wonder, they're actually accused of conspiracy, fraud, malpractice, and I can't remember the last one.
Yeah.
Because they looked at those studies and they said, yep, this is the way to go.
Yeah, it's not good enough if you sue them into oblivion. The actors have to be sued into oblivion as well. They have to be held personally responsible.
Well, the thing about the Dutch, you see, this is 2011, 2014. And this was quite actually surprising for me, is when they first started doing this, evidence-based medicine was actually not a thing. Evidence-based medicine is quite a new... Medicine before evidence-based medicine was kind of like, okay, we have an idea, let's just try it and see what happens. And so when the Dutch were doing this, that's just how medicine was done. And then evidence-based medicine comes along, they're right on the cusp. So the Dutch themselves, that experiment maybe wouldn't have been so bad if what is supposed to happen had happened. If people had then, actually, let me get to this though. This is where you get to actual, I think, criminal behavior. So they did try to replicate. The Dutch get their results and they're positive. So then the Tavistock in London, they try to replicate the Dutch study. It's called the Early Intervention Study. They sign up a bunch of kids. It's weird, they hadn't even finished signing up the last kid. They hadn't even gone to the end of the study. They weren't even close when Polly Carmichael, the director, declares it a success. And we're going to do this. It's a success. We are going to use this treatment. Before they'd even finished the experiment, before they'd even recruited all the children, I believe. But then they carry on the experiment, And they realize quite quickly that they're not finding the same positive outcome that the Dutch found. I think it's because they didn't flip the scales. First of all, they didn't have selection bias. And I think it's because they didn't realize that the Dutch had flipped the scales. Nobody realized that until like 2022 or something. So they know that they're not finding the same positive results. And so what do? They bury it.
I was just, yeah.
Right? They bury it. The only reason we know this is the only reason we know what the results are is because there's a man called Michael Biggs, and he became just fixated on the puberty suppression experiment, and he's like, where is this study? What are the results? Why have we not seen them? He did like FOIA requests, the Freedom of Information, relentlessly until he forced them to publish, and sure enough, the results were absolutely not in any way close to what the Dutch had found. And then the same thing happened in the US. The NIH poured millions of dollars into another attempt at replicating the Dutch findings. And I bet you can guess what happened.
Well, there's a lot there.
Yes.
You said something to me before. I told you this is really dark and it's difficult for me to think about for more than like 5 minutes. And then you said that you went from, you just think about it in terms of a sociological experiment, like it's just fascinating. Yes. I think that's the posture that one has to take when one thinks about this. There's just no other. I guess I'm also feeling kind of low right now because I know everybody's going to get away with it and everybody's going to deny they had anything to do with it. And all the shit that I took for years and that you took and that everybody took, the friendships that I've lost, the people calling me Nazi, the online mobs, all of that stuff, none of those people will surface.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about our disagreement.
Okay.
Before we do that, let's talk about our agreement.
Okay.
We both agree that there should be no medicalization of anything trans if someone is under 18.
Yes.
Okay, so we agree with that. So now where do we disagree? I think the disagreement is, I think that on someone's 18th birthday, they should be allowed to make those decisions themselves.
Right. So what do you think happens at midnight when someone turns 18 that makes them capable of making that decision?
The law says it's the case because they do it with everything else, virtually everything else. There are exceptions like, so you can buy a gun, you can enlist in the military to kill people, literally. I don't think you can buy alcohol in almost all, if not all states in the United States until it's 21. I would be willing to reconsider my opinion if you wanted to make the claim that it should be 21. But it's the age of adulthood in the United States.
It is. It's legal.
Correct.
Adulthood.
Correct.
Now, the reason I disagree completely is because this is not an issue of legal consent to me. This is a developmental issue, and it's an issue of medical ethics. And so, first of all, there's, you always hear the brain is not fully developed until around the mid-20s. And
I've always questioned that. I think that's just, I wonder if there's any evidence for that. I think that's just something that people say.
I did, because you pulled me up on this the other day, and so did Frank Frady when I interviewed him a week ago. So I looked at the studies, and of course this is not my area of expertise at all.
Nor mine.
But there are studies where they track the same individual and they do brain scans at various points, a whole cohort of young people, and they track. And they can see the brain maturing at there's a range, but there are developmental stages you go through. A 6-year-old's brain is chaos, just absolute chaos inside. And then as you hit adolescence, you go through this enormous change, and the brain gradually, bit by bit, will mature. Sometime between 25 and 29 normally is where full adult maturity in cognitive development occurs. You can see it on the brain scans, the MRI scans. So looks legit, but I'm no expert.
It's way outside my area of expertise.
I can speak to okay, let me tell you about myself though. Again, an N of one, but this is my experience. I didn't know anything about brain development when I was in my early to mid 20s. I knew nothing about it. But I was a bit reckless. I was a bit wild in my youth. And then around age 24, 25, something happened. And all of a sudden I realized I need to stop being so stupid. I actually need to start taking care of myself. I started eating better. I started exercising. I suddenly cared about my health, and I didn't want to do all the crazy things that I had been doing. And the change was so dramatic that I remember being in a bar one night and a friend said to me, "Wow, you're really different." And I sensed it, and he obviously noticed it. Something happened to me in my mid-20s, and all of a sudden I was thinking about the future and I was thinking about my health. But anyway, that's anecdotal. I think there's something to the developmental stage.
But let's hold on a second. But let's take that, your experience, and let's say that's generalizable. So let's now say that most, if not all, people have that same experience. Now we can operate under that assumption. I would say that my argument still holds.
Okay, I haven't even got there yet.
Okay.
There's also there's the medical side of it. So you can make your own decisions. You're an adult and you can legally consent. Now, I talk to a lot of parents of trans-identified young people. And there are the parents who resist affirmation and they will not consent for their minor child. They live in fear. Those that have like the 17-year-old, they live in fear of their child's 18th birthday because they know that their child can consent at 18. And they know that their child is waiting for that birthday,
right,
so that they can sign the consent form. And nothing happens when you turn 18. Developmentally, there is no dramatic developmental change. And that brings us to the medical ethics side of it. These kids are not chopping off their own breasts. They're not amputating their own penises. There's a medical professional involved who's gone to med school for many, many years, has invested an enormous amount of time, effort, money to become a medical professional. One would hope has taken some sort of Hippocratic oath to first do no harm. That medical professional needs to see the patient not as a fully developed adult. They're only an adult in a legal sense. They are not an adult in any other sense. They're not fully developed. They still have their whole life ahead of them. They're not even close to understanding whether or not they'll want to have children, which is something that typically comes around age 30, late 20s to mid 30s. These are young people who they're not capable for understanding and making long-term decisions about their fertility. And that medical professional needs to understand that.
Okay, so maybe this is another difference of opinion. The way to make people responsible is to make them responsible. It's not to mollycoddle them. It's to give them more influence and decision-making capacity.
That's okay. There's another point that I want to make there. Not only are they're not being mollycoddled, they're being lied to. So any young person who finds themselves
I agree, that's a huge problem.
Right. Any young person who finds themselves in the hands of a gender-affirming medical professional.
That's a problem.
They're lying. They're saying this is medically necessary.
Right.
This is life-saving. If you don't do this, you'll kill yourself.
Right.
This is evidence-based when it's not. They have not one shred of evidence. These medical professionals all of society is lying to these young people. They have been bombarded with, they think they're a type of human being that doesn't exist. They think they're transgender.
Okay. So I think everything you've said is true, but then that would mean for your argument, there should be no upper age limit. There should ban the procedure.
There we go. That's technically, it's technically true. I am very much on the extreme. I don't have an upper age limit. I don't think it's medicine. I think the entire experiment has been misguided from the very beginning, and I do not think you can call it medicine. I don't think medicine should be amputating healthy body parts. You can't change a person's sex. There's no diagnosis. There's no guarantee that these people are going to benefit. And
I agree with all of that.
Right.
But still, people ought to have bodily autonomy. And you're familiar with the people who want to chop off their own limbs.
It's been my obsession for a long time. Yeah.
So, and you don't think that physicians, surgeons should chop off the limbs of people?
I absolutely do not. Of course not. And you see, there's this whole, there was a guy doing it in Scotland in the 1990s. There was a surgeon who chopped a healthy leg off two men, one leg each. And his reasoning was, if I don't do it, they'll do it themselves. That was basically, and the hospital ethics board discovered what he was doing, reviewed it, and said, absolutely no way, you can't. And they ended the experiment right there. It's the same idea with trans. It's, if we don't do this, they will do it themselves. And there's some truth to that, because in the early days when this was not widespread,
abortion.
Well, I mean, but the trans thing is different because it's very extreme in that, you know, there were men who tried to chop their own penises off. Like I remember reading about one man who, he was so desperate, he tried to perform his own vaginoplasty. He studied and tried to do it himself. And so the reasoning is, if we don't do it for them, they'll do it themselves. But
yeah, I'm not. Okay, so I don't think that's enough reason. I guess it depends on.
Either.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on the role of autonomy. Like, what kind of sovereignty do you think one should have over one's own body? Or is your problem, is that not the right question for you? Is the question that should the medical establishment, that is the question, is that a fundamental violation of medical ethics?
If you're calling it medicine, then it should be guided by medical ethics. If you're calling it extreme cosmetic body modification that is not medicine and is not meant to improve your health or alleviate any sort of medical
then maybe
problem.
we can compromise. Maybe that's our common ground.
Right.
We don't call it medicine, and we just allow people to set up clinics to just, once you're 18, just lop off people's genitals.
Exactly.
Just roadside clinics. They just go up and they don't even they don't wear white coats, and maybe they wear cowboy boots, and they're like, you want your junk cut off? Come on in here, $20.
There was, you're describing, because I was obsessed with the people who want the limbs cut off when I was writing about that whole scandal. There was a man, and honestly, I think they called him Tabletop Brown. Yeah. And he would chop off in like a kitchen or something, he would chop people's legs off. People died of like gangrene and everything after this man.
I hope they volunteer. I mean, I hope that he wasn't like kidnapping them and doing this.
No, they had a paraphilia. They were like autogynephilic men. They were obsessed with, they had the paraphilia where they want a leg cut off, and they were so completely obsessed. It's an all-consuming sexual obsession that they couldn't find anyone to chop their legs off, so they would go to this man called Tabletop Brown. He would chop their legs off, but he also did sex reassignment surgery as well.
So I'm trying to say this without being a dick, but who is somebody to tell anybody that they shouldn't have their limbs chopped off? Like, who are you to tell someone they shouldn't have their limbs chopped off?
I
know that must seem totally insane. Everyone's looking at me like I'm completely insane, but I'm like, I'm being really sincere. Like, who am I to tell anybody you can live any kind of life you want to lead? It's no one's business but yours. I guess if you want to make the argument that the taxpayer will pay for it, I'm all in. Like, I don't think
it's not even
it should be
for me.
Funded by taxpayers.
It's not even that. My thing is more, if you want to chop your own leg off, go for it. If you want to involve a medical professional, that medical professional should have ethical principles, should have taken an oath not to harm a healthy body, because you're a medical professional. It's not your job to injure people. It's your job to heal people. If you want to chop your own leg off, go for it. You want to chop your own penis
I'm
off?
completely sympathetic to that, and there's something, and I'd be willing to revise my opinion on that. And is the compromise that we allow people with minimal, maybe licensure, to set up roadside stands where the people and we just don't call it medicine?
I think perhaps not the roadside stands. If we're going with cosmetic, I mean, there's cosmetic surgeons. If you want to put it into the realm of,
that's still medicine.
Cosmetic surgery is not strictly. It's not healing. It's for. But
even cosmetic surgery, you're board. I mean, in the United States, you're board certified.
Oh, one would hope anyone who's doing any form of surgery is certified, but you can't call it medicine. Cosmetic surgery is not medicine. It's not for the purpose of healing or curing illness or
but I mean, is
improving health.
So your problem is calling this medicine and having physicians do this.
Absolutely.
But you don't have any problem with someone who's 18 just lopping off their own junk.
I think it would be ill-advised.
Well, of course.
I think some kind of psychiatric intervention ought to be attempted first. You can't stop a person doing that. I don't think it's the sign of a healthy mind to want to do that.
No, there's something profoundly and deeply wrong. Now, so I'm trying to think of counterexamples in my own head. You know, I think I saw this episode on TV when I was at the gym of this guy who got these horns implanted in his head, and he had tattoos in his face and even in his eyes and such. We allow that. Now that's not medicine, but that's extreme. Oh, and he had the tongue thing. Have you ever had a waiter?
I'm pretty sure I've seen that guy. I know exactly who you're talking about.
Have you ever had a waiter? I've had a waiter who split his tongue, and he was like, have you ever had that before?
Never seen that.
So what is this about? So I guess the other thing is a colon vagina. What is that?
Yeah, so there you go. This is a good transition into that subject.
Because David, the guy who's Reed's buddy, I've told him I'd give him $50 if he wants, and lunch, if he gets a colon vagina. It'd be really good for diversity.
Yes. I'm sure it would really improve his life too.
Well, that's less important.
Right.
Evan, I'm going to give Evan that too. Evan, $50. Reed, you too. I'll give you $50 if you want a colon vagina. The nonprofit will pay for it. We'll document your whole procedure. So what is a colon vagina?
The specific one that I'm talking about, first of all, we're going back to WPATH.
Okay.
And WPATH has an approach to medical ethics that prioritizes autonomy. If a person wants something, they should be able to have it. It's kind of consumer-driven body modification that they call medically necessary, evidence-based, and life-saving medical care. So in Ontario, we've got the living, breathing example of how far off the rails gender medicine has gone under WPATH. There is this man. Okay, he's a man. He identifies as non-binary with a female dominant spirit, if I remember correctly. Okay,
I'm processing that. Okay.
Got it? You're with me?
To the extent that I can be, yes.
So it means that he is neither male nor... he's both male and female.
Yes.
And that makes him non-binary.
Yes.
Okay. He wanted to have genital surgery, but because he's both male and female, he wanted to keep his penis and have a surgically created vagina.
Well, it sounds like a great idea.
What could possibly go wrong, right? Right? Now, normally...
Twice the fun.
Right. Well, but normally when you create this vagina for the man, you amputate the penis and you use the penile tissue to line the cavity that you're calling a vagina, right? That's the traditional way of doing it. But because he wants to keep his penis, they need some other tissue to line the cavity, and that's the colon. They take... This is quite normal for the puberty block kids. This is what they'll do because they don't have penile tissue. So they take a section of the colon and they line the vagina. But now in Ontario, we cover most of these surgeries, but we don't cover, what's it called? It's called penile preserving vaginoplasty. We don't cover that. We cover the traditional one, but we don't cover the second set of genitals.
Right.
This man wants a second set of genitals.
Okay.
So he was not happy about this. The insurance, the provincial insurance wouldn't cover it. So he took it to like a health review board and they ruled against him. And then he took it into the Human Rights Tribunal. His argument was that he, as a non-binary person with a female dominant spirit, if he's not allowed to have his second set of genitals, his colon vagina created and covered by the taxpayer, that's a violation of his human rights. And it's actually forcing him to have his penis cut off and making the vagina is actually a form of conversion therapy because it's forcing him to have a binary surgery and he's non-binary. And so it's not affirming of his non-binary identity, so it's a form of conversion therapy under Canada's conversion therapy ban. Remarkably, they ruled in his favor. And one of the reasons that they ruled in his favor is because of WPATH. WPATH has, in its utterly insane Standards of Care version 8, which came out in September 2022, we talked about it. They have a whole chapter on non-binary surgeries. So like most people think, when they think non-binary, they think blue hair and they, them pronouns, right? Just like kids playing around. But there's a surgical side to this now that WPATH, because there's no limit to WPATH, like WPATH, it's extreme body modification as a human right for anyone, no matter how they identify. And if you're non-binary and you're both male and female, well, you need both sets of genitals.
You need a colon vagina.
You need a colon vagina. Or if you're non-binary and neither male nor female,
right,
you need nullification. So this is where they just completely nullify, no nipples, no, like a Ken doll, you're just nullified. You're a sexless being. That's WPATH recommends that. There's even as far as the customized mastectomy scars. There's no limit to what WPATH will endorse.
So are you saying this because you are using this as a counterexample that I should change my mind at 18? Because I have changed my mind about something. Because before I was going to give Evan and David $50, but this sounds like such a good idea. I think I might give them $100 for the surgery. Evan is psyched. He's ready to sign up.
Okay, my question, I suppose, to you is, at age 18, should you be able to consent to having a colon vagina?
Oh my God, I can't believe this is my life. That someone would ask me that question. I have to seriously entertain it. Okay, let me really think about that for a second. Okay. Boy, that does seem to be incredibly extreme. And we're saying, and for the purpose of argument, we're saying this person is paying for it themselves. Let's just say that makes it easier.
Right. They ruled, so the Ontario taxpayer is paying for this.
Okay. Well, that's a red line. That's absolutely
and
not.
Even worse,
Absolutely
just to finish the story, even worse is we don't do these surgeries in Canada. So the Ontario taxpayer is paying for this man to fly down to Texas to the Crane Surgical Center, which Curtis Crane is renowned in my world for being an absolute charlatan criminal. Like, this man I can't even believe he's not in prison. We're paying for this very severely mentally unwell man to fly down to Texas to get his colon vagina created by Curtis Crane. And we're calling it medicine.
Well, we'll fly these guys out in the winter. Okay. So I really have to think about this. So, okay. So someone 18. wants a colon vagina.
Keeps his penis, colon, vagina.
Yeah,
Should
it
he
can-
be able to consent?
Oh boy, that is. Boy, I'd really have to think about that one. I think my answer is yes. As crazy as that sounds, and the reason I think my answer is yes is because the only way. Well, two things. One, the only way you make people responsible for their own decisions is to give them more responsibility, and they have to deal with the consequences of those decisions. But in this case, clearly anybody who would want that is severely mentally ill. So do we let severely mentally ill people, like, the case about the person who blinded herself because she wanted to be blind and now she's so happy that she's blind? Would we allow a surgeon to blind somebody who wanted to be blinded? The problem is you could never know that someone was in their right sana mensa, sana rasa. You could never know that someone was sane mind, sound mind, body, because anybody who would undergo that in the first place is obviously has some kind of deep mental disorder. Doesn't even begin to. I mean, I don't know. That's a super tricky. Should we just allow people who are 18 who have money to get any kind of modification they want on their body? I mean, what if someone wants 50 goat testicles? That's another thing for Evan. That's your next thing. After you get the colon vagina, we're gonna set you up with some great goat testicles. Should we just allow people to do that? Oh boy, that's I don't know. That's really pushing the limits of my classical liberalism.
So the answer is yes, no?
I think, in complete honesty, I'd really have to think about it. I'd really have to think about it. I mean, there is something deeply disturbing about somebody mentally ill. Again, not that we need yet another extreme example, but if somebody wanted to get a whale penis surgically attached to their head who was 18 and maybe they just won the lottery, should we sanction this?
I think I know what my answer to that is. It's interesting. The man, okay, this guy is not the first case in Ontario to go through this. We have the female equivalent in that we have a woman who thinks she's non-binary, both male and female, and she wanted the arm flesh appendage sewn onto her groin. And normally when they do that, and honestly, I don't know how they do this, but apparently they remove all of the internal reproductive organs, including the vagina, or they sew the vagina shut and they remove all the internal organs. And she didn't want that. She wanted just the arm flesh appendage attached and everything else. And she won the right as well.
As a penis? That would be
they make a fake penis. They strip the skin and the flesh of the woman's forearm and they fashion it into a penis shape and then they sew it onto the groin. We talked about this in our last interview in Lisbon, remember?
Yeah.
There can be a pump if you want a pump, or it's just a limp appendage. Now, it's an ethical question in and of itself whether phalloplasty should ever be allowed, in my opinion, in that I think any surgeon who is stripping a woman's forearm and fashioning it into a penis and sewing it onto her groin, I think any surgeon willing to do that probably belongs in prison. I think it's an actual crime. But this woman, her argument was basically, there's no reason why you should force me to have extra surgery because that puts me at risk. That's more of a risk to my health.
But she didn't need the surgery is elective. She didn't need the surgery at all.
It's gender-affirming care. It's medically necessary, life-saving care. That's how WPATH defines it.
Yeah.
And that's how we follow WPATH. So this is gender-affirming care. This woman thinks she's a man.
What crazy institutional corruption.
Okay, but do you think...
truly insane. Okay, go ahead. Do
you think an 18-year-old should be allowed to consent to phalloplasty? Bearing in mind that she's clearly not mentally well. Nobody who wants an arm flesh appendage attached to their groin could ever be considered mentally well.
I'm struggling.
Have you seen the arms? Have you seen how gruesome?
I have. In fact, we're going to do an exhibition on that.
Okay.
I'll talk to you about later.
Okay.
Reed and I are going to do that in Brussels. Did you ever see Pulp Fiction?
Yes, of course.
Do you remember the scene when the woman has all the like metal in her face? And the guy's like, who's that with all the shit in her face? You remember that? I remember I was in the airport with my dad, and it was a long time ago. And the woman just with just insane bones and like metal and like, I don't know, looking at those things or whatever, these diamonds or fake diamonds. And my father said that poor, something that's, I'm paraphrasing, oh, that poor woman, no one should have done that to her. That should be illegal. And I clearly don't think it should be illegal. So I guess then the question is, what are the limits of it?
Well, no one told her that was medically necessary, life-saving care. No one told her that was going to cure anything.
I suppose it's disanalogous, but yeah, I don't know. I'd really have to. Do we let 18-year-olds with mental disorders who happen to have some money, maybe they earn their money on a paper route, do we let them mutilate their body in the most ghastly of ways? I don't know. I mean, you're making me seriously reconsider.
I think it all comes down, it's all about medical ethics to me. It's got nothing to do with the legal age of consent. It's like, lobotomies are not illegal, right? They never banned lobotomies.
Oh yeah, that's another one. What if someone wants a lobotomy?
I've asked people on Twitter this many times. If somebody wants a lobotomy, should they be allowed to have one? Because they're not illegal. All you need to find is somebody willing to jab ice picks through your eye socket, and you can have a lobotomy. If you can find that
I'll pay you guys $200 for that, but then he wouldn't be able to man the cameras, so it would get a big problem.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get reimbursed for lobotomy surgery, dude.
But they don't do that anymore because psychiatry realized that that was a terrible crime and it didn't actually help anyone. And that's the way I see gender medicine. Anyone can consent over 18. You want to consent to a lobotomy, you can. But the question is, should the surgeon do it?
Let me ask you a question. And it's hard to be serious when the conversation almost demands a little levity, but okay. Let's say that you call it a paraphilia, you could call it whatever you want. Somebody wants something like super bizarre, like David, who's in the other room, wants. Like the only thing I think is like he wants just goat testicles affixed to his torso. And let's say that we found, 100 people who want just the weirdest, like elephant penises on the back of their neck. They want those affixed, and they want like just completely like, some guy wants 8 penises and another woman wants like whatever they want. And let's say that we did some kind of longitudinal study where we tracked these people for 10, 20, 30 years. And we found out that the people who want these truly bizarre things, they're all like exuberant at the end of the time. This is having these goat testicles is on me, the best thing ever. I only have 22, but I should have 27. I'm so happy. Would you change your mind as a result of that?
We had a similar conversation in Lisbon. I can't remember I think it was just on the trans issue. I wouldn't, because the self-report never would do it for me.
Yeah,
remember?
I know, that's the problem. Yeah, I remember.
If you've gone to such an extreme and you've done something so outrageous to your body.
Validated by everyone. Oh, those goat testicles they make you look like a beautiful woman.
Well, I mean, there's that. And there's also just, let's say that there's no possible way to get rid of the goat testicles or whatever you've had done. You're just invested in it being the right decision because you made that decision and you did that to yourself.
Okay.
So self-report could never convince me.
There'd be no way to know. I'm trying to think of like secondary things. There'd be no way to know. Yeah, I don't know. You've made me rethink. I don't know. Should we allow 18-year-olds with severe mental disorder to get, colon vaginas or some crazy
colon vaginas or
insane.
Arm flesh appendages sewn onto their groin or...
Yeah, I'm much less confident now than I was before. That's just really, I'm trying to get beyond ideology here. I'm like trying to think about this as a non-ideological perspective, not classical liberalism, not like conservatives and all. I'm just trying to think about this like, and I find myself rationalizing, oh, this isn't that many people. So I honestly, maybe I'm much less confident now than when I began the conversation.
Okay. I think.
All right. Well, thank you for helping me revise my beliefs with reality.
You're welcome.
With a dose of reality.
You're welcome.
I'm still going to give David $50 though for the colon vagina.
For the colon vagina.
Yeah.
I didn't go into the fact that it's too disgusting to go into the fact that they do smell. Like, you know that, right?
But that won't bother him.